Let's be direct from the start. This isn't about superstition or what social media means when it posts. Karma will handle it. The Vedic framework of karma is one of the most precise and practically useful systems for understanding human behavior and its consequences ever developed. Most people carry a version of it that is essentially a fairy tale about cosmic justice. This tutorial covers the actual framework, what it says, how the mechanism works, and what it means for how you live. If you have patterns that keep repeating despite your efforts, this framework offers a real explanation. Here's the core problem. Karma has become cultural shorthand for bad people eventually suffer. Someone behaves badly, something inconvenient happens to them later, and we say karma. It's satisfying. It's also almost entirely inaccurate as a reading of the original framework. The reason this matters isn't academic. If you think karma is a cosmic ledger, you'll approach your patterns with the wrong tools. Offset strategies, compensating gestures, good deeds as currency. The actual framework asks something harder and far more useful. What are you doing, consistently, that is producing your current experience? The Sanskrit word karma literally means action, not punishment, not reward. Action, and the natural, mechanical effects that flow from it. The way a stone thrown into water produces ripples. The ripples don't judge the stone. They don't punish or reward it. They simply follow from it, as a matter of physics. Anchor that definition and everything else in the framework becomes logical. This is not a morality system. It is a causality system. That distinction changes everything about how you use it in practice, because it takes the external judge entirely out of the picture. Sanchita karma is the full accumulated stock of every karmic impression you have ever generated. Every action taken, every habitual thought, every pattern of response, built up across your entire history. Think of it as the complete balance sheet of everything you've ever set in motion. Most of it is not active at any given moment. It sits latent, like debt that hasn't been called in yet. You can't audit it directly, but you can see its influence in the texture of your automatic reactions, your recurring fears, the tendencies that show up without your choosing them. Prarabdha karma is the portion of that accumulated balance that is currently bearing fruit. The specific conditions, circumstances, and tendencies you are actively working through right now. The classic image is an arrow that has already been released from a bow. It is in flight. You cannot call it back. You can navigate its trajectory, how you respond to it, what you build from it, but you cannot change the fact that it was released. Some of what you're dealing with right now, certain recurring themes or limitations, is Prarabdha. It's already in motion. The framework doesn't say resign yourself. It says work with what's actually here. Agami karma is what you are generating right now, in this moment, through every action you take, physical, verbal, and mental. Every choice you make, every way you habitually respond to difficulty, every pattern you reinforce or interrupt through repetition. This is Agami, and it enters the stock. This is the layer over which you have genuine agency. You cannot change what Prarabdha has already set in motion. You absolutely determine what Agami is producing. This is why the framework isn't fatalistic. It's directional. Your past shaped your present. Your present is actively shaping your future. That's not a burden, it's leverage. The operating unit of this entire framework is the samskara. It translates roughly as impression or groove. Every action you take leaves a subtle impression in the mind. Think of pressing a finger into soft clay. Each press leaves a mark, and pressing in the same spot repeatedly creates a deep groove. The groove makes it easier and more automatic to go there again. That is the mechanism. Repeated actions become grooves. Grooves become the default path. The mind runs along its grooves automatically, which is why habits feel effortless and breaking them feels hard. You're not just choosing differently once. You're carving an entirely new channel while the old one still exists. The progression works in sequence, and it's worth understanding each step. An action leaves an impression. That impression deepens with repetition and becomes a tendency, a default way of responding. Accumulated tendencies solidify into character, who you reliably are when things get difficult. And character becomes the lens through which you perceive the world, which means it shapes what you notice, what you interpret as threatening or safe, and what you believe is possible for you. Here's the critical implication. The lens is built from the patterns, which means the patterns are self-reinforcing. They filter out evidence that contradicts them. Changing a pattern means working against the lens that the pattern itself created. Buddhism developed a parallel analysis with a precise and useful image, the two arrows. The first arrow is the event, the difficulty, the pain. the thing that arrives uninvited that you didn't choose. You often cannot avoid the first arrow. The second arrow is the one you fire yourself. The resistance to what happened, the story you build around it, the suffering about the suffering. The second arrow is always optional. But here's the karmic dimension. Shooting the second arrow becomes habitual. If you consistently respond to difficulty by constructing prolonged narratives of grievance or resistance, that response pattern deepens into a samskara. Over time, the second arrow starts flying automatically, before you've even thought about it. The Dhammapada, one of the core early Buddhist texts, opens with a statement that maps directly onto this framework. Mind is the forerunner of all actions. Everything you do starts in mind. The quality of the mind generating your actions determines the quality of what those actions create. A reactive mind, one that responds from pattern, from habit, from grooves you haven't examined, creates reactive karma. A clear mind, one that can pause, observe accurately, and respond with some degree of intention, creates clearer karma. This is not a moral statement about who is a better person. It is a description of mechanism. Your results are downstream of your mental patterns, not just your external circumstances. Here is where most people go wrong. They try to balance the ledger. Do enough good things to offset the bad patterns. Donate generously, perform the right rituals, make amends, accumulate moral credit. Many religious traditions actively encourage this transactional approach to morality, and it is deeply intuitive. It mirrors how commerce works. The problem is that it leaves the underlying pattern entirely intact. You can be chronically dishonest in your close relationships while also being generous with strangers. The generosity does not neutralize the dishonesty. The samskara of dishonesty continues to deepen with every repetition. The mechanism does not accept substitutes. The pattern is the thing, and it persists until it is actually interrupted. The impersonal nature of this mechanism is uncomfortable for most people, but it is also the reason the framework is genuinely useful. If karma were administered by an external judge, you could appeal to the judge, bargain with it, perform for it. Because it isn't, because it operates the way gravity operates, without malice or favor, there is nothing to appeal to. The pattern produces results the way a plant produces fruit, mechanically, predictably. This means you cannot charm your way out of your patterns. But it also means you are never condemned by some external verdict. The door to interrupting the pattern is always open, because the mechanism is impersonal in both directions. The hardest part of working with this framework, honestly, is that the pattern you most need to see is the lens you are looking through. You can see other people's patterns clearly. A friend who repeatedly chooses the same type of unavailable partner. A colleague who consistently creates the same kind of conflict. Your own patterns, by contrast, you experience as reality. The anxious person does not experience themselves as anxious. They experience the world as genuinely threatening. The avoidant person does not experience themselves as avoiding. They experience the confrontation as genuinely not worth having. Seeing your own patterns requires going underneath the lens, which is why it requires help, practice, and specific methods, not just good intentions. Meditation, genuine self-inquiry, and honest relationships with people who will tell you what you cannot see about yourself. These are not optional spiritual extras in this framework. They are the basic diagnostic infrastructure for doing the actual work. If you cannot see the pattern clearly, you cannot interrupt it. You will continue treating the symptoms while the mechanism runs on unchanged underneath. What meditation specifically trains is the capacity to observe your own mental activity in real time, to notice the reactive pattern arising before you have already acted on it. That gap between stimulus and response is small at first. It grows with practice. Growing that gap is precisely how you get ahead of the groove. The most common and consequential mistake in working with this framework is externalizing the pattern. Someone has a consistent pattern of choosing unavailable partners. They call it bad luck in love. Someone consistently agrees to things they resent. They call it a demanding job. Someone consistently avoids difficult conversations. They call it other people being unreasonable. None of these external framings are false. The partner is genuinely unavailable. The job is genuinely demanding. The other people may genuinely be unreasonable. But the pattern of who you select, what you agree to, and what you avoid is yours. That is the part that is Agami, generated right now by your choices. Externalizing keeps the pattern invisible and therefore intact. What actually interrupting a groove looks like. You identify the habitual response precisely. Say, the pattern of withdrawing when criticized rather than staying present. You build enough self-observation to catch it arising. Then you act differently, not once, as a gesture or an experiment, differently and consistently, over enough repetitions for a new groove to develop its own momentum. The old groove does not disappear. Sanchita is not erased, but the new pattern acquires weight, and over time becomes the more dominant tendency. This is not a quick fix. It is the actual mechanics of character change, described with precision in a framework that has been stress-tested across centuries and traditions. Here is the first practical step you can take now. Identify one persistent problem in your life, something that recurs despite your efforts to resolve it. A dynamic in a relationship, a pattern in your professional behavior, a recurring emotional response, a thing you consistently avoid. Now ask, honestly and without self-punishment, what am I consistently doing that is contributing to this? Not what is being done to me, what am I doing? You are looking for the pattern underneath the story you tell about the situation. Most people stop this inquiry quickly because the honest answer is uncomfortable. The instruction is to keep going past that discomfort because the pattern is what you are actually looking for. The second step is to name the samskara specifically. Once you can see the pattern, the habitual response, the default move, give it a precise name. Not, I'm bad at conflict, which is too vague to work with. Something specific. I agree in the moment and build resentment later rather than declining up front. Or, I interpret silence as disapproval and escalate before checking. The more precisely you name the groove, the more specifically you can target the interruption. Naming it also begins the process of not being identical with it. The pattern is something you have developed. It is not who you are. That distinction is small, but it creates the space in which change becomes possible. The third step is this. Choose one concrete, different action, and repeat it. Specifically, the next time the pattern would normally trigger, do something different. It does not need to be dramatic. Small and consistent is more effective than large and occasional. Track it. Notice what the old groove feels like when you decline to follow it. There will be discomfort, friction, a pull back toward the familiar path. That pull is not a sign you're doing it wrong. It is a sign you are actually interrupting the pattern rather than performing around it. Over enough repetitions, what changes is not just the behavior. The lens itself begins to shift, and that is when the deeper change becomes visible. The full article goes considerably deeper. The philosophical question of where genuine injustice fits in this framework, why the Buddhist parallel matters, and the specific reason why self-observation practices are not optional decoration. If you engage with this framework seriously, not as a belief system, but as a diagnostic tool, it is one of the most practically useful structures available for understanding why certain patterns persist in your life and what actually interrupts them. The answer is not performing more, suffering more, or waiting for the universe to settle the score. It is pattern interruption, clearly seen, specifically named, and consistently applied. Full article at realsyllabus.com.